You're listening to Business Stories with Ryan Arcaracci, where I speak to business professionals from all walks of life. Thanks for listening, and let's get to it. Welcome to Business Stories. This is Ryan, and I'm excited to have you all here with us. I have a little bit of an assignment for you today, and that comes down to you and thinking about your career, your life up to this point, no matter what age you are, no matter where you are in your career. Think about your life and your story, because everybody has a story. This will come back to you later as we go through this episode, but I want to introduce my guest today, Mr. Scott Turman. He's an entrepreneur, a technologist. He's an author with a book in the Amazon top 10. He's worked for NASA, the U.S. Department of Defense, Disney, and other Fortune 500 companies. He's a busy man. Mr. Scott Turman, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me on.
It's great to have you. So talk to us a little bit about your background and your experience and how you came to be who you are today.
A millennia ago, I guess 25 years ago, I kind of started my career just kind of consulting in and around the Central Florida area. I kind of shoehorned myself into NASA. And, once you have one of those big names on your resume, you're pretty much able to go wherever you want.
Right.
And then, I have to describe the last 25 years as being a moderately priced technology prostitute. That's kind of where I've been for at least 20 some of those years, and then, it's kind of just went from, gig to gig. I would basically just leave for higher money. Every time I turn around every 2 years, I would just go, look, 25 more bucks an hour. Go the next thing. And next thing you know, you're doing pretty well, but the next level really is kind of owning your own deal. Right. So 9 years ago, I started Brightray Consulting, and at one point we had almost 22 employees, kind of consultants. And we've done that quite well with that for the last couple of years. And then here in the last year, we kind of got, Brightray Publishing off the ground.
So let's talk about Brightray Publishing. What are the details of that? How does that operate?
So we write books for CEOs and entrepreneurs and founders, doctors, actors, musicians, just the whole gamut of anybody who's trying to get a message out there. Ultimately, books were kind of the realm of the academia or someone who actually had the time to spend a year writing a book. And even if they wrote a book, it wouldn't be very good because they weren't trained in such things. If you're an engineer, you're probably not an amazing author, only because it takes a while to get right.
Right.
So we've worked out a process, with our writing crew where we do this kind of interview process for an hour to hour and a half a week. We kind of pull that book out of your head, while the entrepreneur just kind of sits there and muses, where, the writers are behind the scenes sanding down a message and kind of keeping that audience, in the lens of what the book is about. And, it's just not easy for the average human to write a book.
So here's a question. I mean, if you're not a famous musician or actor, actress, entrepreneur, if you're just a person, and you've got a career, maybe you're, mid-level executive or you're starting your career, how do you turn that into a book? I mean, how do you recommend someone who's not well known to start that process?
Ultimately, you have to have the experiences worth sharing. If you're earlier in your career, and you've accomplished nothing, I don't think a book's going to do much for you.
Right.
But if you're going to try to kind of expand your brand of expertise, everybody's got something that they should be amazing in, especially if you've kind of had over a certain age, you've probably accomplished something, right? Whatever that may be.
Right.
And ultimately, this book is going to magnify that expertise. Right. And that's basically what it's for. I mean, if you're these books are kind of, think of them as the bedrock, of kind of that next stage of career or, kind of personal brand or kind of face of the company. Right. Founders are using the book to raise Series A funding. Founders are using the book to, acquire more talent. CEOs are using this as, I'm retiring from this Fortune 20, next month. This is my next step. Well, let me write a book so I can go do the go do speeches or do that kind of circuit.
Right.
Trying to figure out what it is that you're good at, what you're going to write about. ultimately, if you're trying to just use this to get more business, you've only got to appeal to a handful of people to make any money. You don't have, this doesn't have to be write a book for everybody. It's going to fail.
Yeah.
You've got to write a book for those 500 people or 1,000 people that need what you've got. And that's kind of how you should frame everything.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. How much of your book, you can get into your personal life, your background, your family life, your relationships. Should that be a part of your book? If you're writing something that is more about your expertise, is that okay to get into that sort of personal stuff?
What's interesting is that as much as people hate hearing this book is not about you. This is a book is about what this book can do for the human who bought it, the human who has invested the time and money to look into it. We try to limit that to 5 or 7% of the book, kind of the backstory. And the backstory, all that really does for you, it says, hey, this is why you should listen to me. This is why I'm the expert. And you kind of try to get that out of the way, in chapter 1. And then if it highlights the lessons learned and why you believe a certain way, absolutely bring it up. Okay. But if it's just belaboring, how you were, had to, walk both ways uphill in the snow, every Christmas in Chicago, that doesn't have any value. But if it highlights hard work or it, whatever it frames that story in, it's got value.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. So, I mean, there's two folds to this, right? There's writing the book, getting the book out there, and then there's the whole other side of the coin, which is marketing the book, right? So what do you advise to do that, especially if you're not extremely well known,
Right. And it all depends on what you're trying to do. There's a segment of the population who doesn't care if they sell one book. They're basically using the book. They FedEx a copy of their book to their prospective clients. They're using it to close more deals. But if someone's trying to get their kind of face out there and then kind of so more of a recognizable brand. Obviously podcasts like this are a really good start. And finding your way into Inc. magazine or Entrepreneur magazine, there's definitely a million ways to do that. Kind of bolstering your brand by being able to point back to, oh, look, they quoted me at the Wall Street Journal again, for this Elon Musk quote or whatever. Right. Ultimately, it's a quality signal. You're signaling quality of your expertise everywhere. Right. And ultimately that's what this book is, the ultimate kind of signal of quality. But the whole book, launch, we have an entire process that kind of, highlights all that. But a lot of that, if you're not known, it comes down to the people you do know, your true believers, your family, your friends, lever who they know. That's kind of how you start. That's how everybody started. I don't care who you are. You start with your initial circle of friends and expand out, your influence. And if you're starting from zero, then that's the best place to start. It's people who love and trust you already. Right. And they'll be champions.
And I think it's fascinating if we look at people, a lot of famous people, people like Anthony Bourdain, who unfortunately passed away, but he did write a book back in 2000, which really leveraged and launched his career and got him a TV show and so much more. Right. So it's amazing what can come from getting a book out there. Would you agree that it can really launch things? Would you agree that something great could happen from it if it gets in the right hands?
Yeah. I mean, ultimately it's a line in the sand about what you believe. I mean, typically I believe that these books, that when you write a book, it should be your kind of, this is my belief system. This is why you should trust me. And, this is my expertise. Anthony Bourdain, Kitchen Confidential, that was something else. That was working at a kitchen as a chef to having a show in like a year. And anything's possible, but nothing's possible if you do nothing. And a book is this kind of audacious thing, this one grand gesture, that could propel your career. I mean, look at the careers that have all basically based on a book. I mean, it's a good place to, it's that big start, it can be that big start if you do it right.
Yeah. So you have two books out there. You have one on Amazon called Stop Getting Effed by Technical Recruiters, a Nerd's Guide to Negotiating Salary and Benefits, which I absolutely love. Talk about your own experience with those books. Like how did you come about? Well, there's that book, let's say, and the other one is How to Build Your Brand with a Book, Establishing Yourself as a Published Expert, both available on Amazon and hard copy too. So what was your experience with those? What made you come up with those sort of topics?
So the first book, the negotiating book, I had in my head for 10 years. Well, actually more like 20. Technology people, typically, we're a trusting folk. Nerds are a trusting folk.
Yeah.
And recruiters kind of are that high paid middle person that sits between you and those gigs that you may not have kind of access to without them. They're really more the sales arm when you think about it.
Right.
For instance, I could never have, shoehorned my way into NASA if it wasn't for a technical recruiting company selling my wares. But ultimately, they didn't pay me very well. No one does unless you ask for it. Right. And I just kind of noticed this pattern of technologists getting taken advantage of because they just did not know how to negotiate.
Yeah.
So when we wrote this book, it was really just from nuts to bolts how to kind of guide your technology career and how to stop getting screwed over by HR and or technical recruiters, how to ask for more, how to do all those things that that are uncomfortable, and that the book kind of covers on, hey, you're the prize, you're the person that knows how the technology goes, and they're not. And ultimately you have the leverage, but we never understood that, or nerds we don't really understand that. And this book kind of highlights that. And ultimately this allowed me for my for Brightray Consulting, my consulting company, it made it a lot easier to hire people when because they're some of these technologies have a handful of people in the entire world that understand them. Right. And as you can understand, they're kind of hard to A, get a hold of, and B, convince them to come work for you. And this book kind of helped me go do that.
Wow. Okay. And then the other book is more about what we've been talking about, building your brand with a book. So, and I'm assuming you came up with this a while back. What was the trigger that made that book come about?
So my partner, Zoe Rose, she's kind of I'm kind of the entrepreneur side, and she's really more the soup to nuts, rubber meets the road writing part of the company. Ultimately we're trying to walk the walk, talk the talk. Yeah. This book, when people call us, we're kind of expensive. We're kind of a range of 18 to 25 grand. We have a high priced item. When people call us, we FedEx them this book. And it says, hey, this is why you should trust us. Here's literally what we're going to do, and here's why you don't want to do it because it's such a painful process. But here's an example of our expertise. And we're kind of we're just kind of rubber meets the road, make it happen. We're doing the same thing that we advise our clients to do. Right.
So let's say, somebody's listening and they've got sort of a seed of an idea, right? And they want to grow that seed into a tree, into a book. Before they talk to you, what's a good thing to start with? How do you prepare to talk to somebody like you? Is it, you create an outline? Do you just kind of journal and write down some things? What do you advise?
Well, it's interesting. If you're let's just pretend you're writing a book on your own, you're going to have to do all that stuff, right? You're going to have to kind of understand, what you're writing about, who you're writing it for, yada, yada, yada. I prefer understanding the audience. If you come to us and you go, look, my audience is people who are, getting ready to retire, or they're doing this, or they're, they are, they need a marketer, or they need some kind of marketing expert, or whatever. Ultimately, I want to know if I can understand that audience, who the book is for, right? We can come up with a concept and conceptualize all the things it takes to make the book, to actually speak to that audience. Okay. So, in our case, we'll actually brainstorm and come up with the titles and the covers, all the things that really suck about writing books. Right. You don't have to come with us very much, but you do have to understand your audience. If you don't understand your audience, this book won't do anything for you. No book will. Ultimately, you've got to know who you're selling to.
I think you're absolutely right. And I agree with you 100%. I think the problem is when we think about writing a book about our experience, we're only thinking about ourselves. Like, here's what I've done. Here's all the things I've done. Here's all the things I've accomplished. But we're not thinking about how it relates to the people you are trying to reach or sell to. So that's interesting.
That's right. And that's the thing is that, I've read a gazillion books, but a lot of people, a lot of these kind of business books is kind of our focus. I mean, we do other kinds of books. We do, non-business books like, cookbooks and that kind of stuff. But, these books specifically really need to speak to a particular audience and who are your potential clients.
Right.
We can kind of stand down on impetus, but ultimately you've really got to have a good kind of understanding of who this is supposed to speak to.
And I'll give you an example. I'd like to get your opinion on this. Like for example, my older brother is a huge fan of board games. He loves board games, and he started a board game company. He's also a professor. He's a very smart guy, but he has a huge affinity for board games. He loves board games. So I'm thinking, all the people I know in my circle, he's one I feel like would be a great author, because he could talk about, his experience with board games, but also his audience is people who love board games. I mean, people who sit and play these games hours and hours on the weekends. So when you're talking about, let's say, something like that, that's a very niche sort of group, right?
Yeah.
How would you advise in that kind of a thing?
That's awesome. Let's talk about it. Right. So, okay. So it would really depend on what he's doing, right? Is he trying to be that consultant for board games? Is he trying to create a new company for board games? Is he trying to set himself as the expert in these board games? Right. It just depends on what is that kind of lens he's kind of trying to, focus his expertise on. Yeah. Now, if it's becoming, let's say it's some type of consultant for such things, well, maybe it's you go after kind of the encyclopedia of board game types. It's game theory. It's all the things that go along, with board games. Right. If he's trying to be that board game developer, right? Well, maybe it's the process of developing a board game and kind of from soup to nuts and from 0 to 100, how to make it happen. Yeah. And maybe it's very specific. Maybe it's just development. Maybe it's just the marketing. Maybe it all depends on where he is kind of setting himself up as that expert in that industry.
I see. Yeah. And he's creating his own games. So I think he's kind of becoming an expert in the particular games he's trying to get out there and sell. So I think that would be more the twist for that, I think, in some way.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is that, I mean, a book would be a fantastic way for the 1,000 to 2,000 people on the entire planet that absolutely geek and nerd out about the particulars of how to develop a board game. Yeah. That is absolutely his audience. That's right. That's absolutely his audience. Right. And it doesn't take, you don't have to command a lot of that audience to kind of become that expert, Right. And like I said, you don't want to write a book for everybody. You want to write a book for the true believers, the people that really when they hear and read about this stuff, they absolutely freak out because it's exactly what they're interested in. Write it for everybody, and you're writing it for nobody.
And I think it's really interesting because even with my own experience, like I'll listen to a podcast, right, and I'll discover somebody, and I'll immediately go and look them up, and sometimes even buy their book right away just from finding out about them. So everything kind of comes full circle. I think you'll read a book and then discover the author. You'll go and listen, buy their content, buy more books, buy merchandise, whatever. So what do you think about that? I mean, once you have a book, you got to get out there more and be a little more extroverted and network, get on some podcasts, do some videos. Like, do you recommend doing all that stuff as well? Is there any sort of route you should take when you're trying to get your brand or your name out there more?
Yeah, ultimately, if you're just trying to, you're trying to elevate your personal brand. Right. There's a couple of things you really need to pay attention to. A book is a really good start, but the other is how when people look you up, what is the quality signals? What kind of quality signaling are you throwing at them when they look you up? My favorite example is, like, for instance, look up my name, Scott space Turman, Turman, in Google. Mm-hmm. You'll see that I have something called a knowledge panel. It's where Google has separated me out kind of from everything and said, look, this is, as we understand it, this is what we know about Scott Turman. Here's some pictures. Here's the companies he's founded. Here's his patents, copyrights, whatever he may own. And ultimately, it's my belief that showing up that way is kind of it's kind of as far as you can go. Right. With personal branding, because everything else is kind of in support of that. Like, oh crap, like this person's kind of they're special enough to actually have been singled out by Google to kind of show them more information. Then as you kind of drill into their LinkedIn profile, all that's kind of a bedrock, for that initial shock of finding them like that. Right. It's a whole. That's the thing, is one person just can't do it by themselves. I mean, you could become an expert, but it's going to take a while, right? How do you get placements in magazines? Well, that takes a while to figure out. PR people can help you with that. How do you get on podcasts? Well, it's, I've got a full-time person that does nothing that goes around and calls podcasts and tries to get our authors and me on, right? It's multiple full-time hats. And I think if you'll find is that as you grow, you'll find that proliferation of your brand, it actually kind of pays for itself.
Right.
After a while.
And I think what's great and interesting about the times we live in now is 50 years ago, if you wrote a book, you'd have to go and travel and sell that book or speak to people, do some speaking tours and things like that. But nowadays we've got YouTube, we've got Instagram, we've got TikTok, we've got all this stuff. So getting out in front of a lot of people is a lot easier than it used to be. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. But it's kind of harkens back to my thoughts on what you're using the book for, right? Yeah. If you're going to use a book to go close more business, which I'm hoping 60 to 70% of our authors are trying to go after. Yeah. It comes down to getting that in the hands of someone who's maybe already showed interest, kind of a warm lead. Yeah. For instance, when I was, a gazillion years ago, when I was trying to get into Disney, I knew that would be a very interesting, consulting gig. It'd be very lucrative, but I couldn't for the life of me figure out how to do it.
Right.
It occurred to me that I should probably just, do something crazy and contact the CEO or the IT director, right? Which is bonkers. Now I look back and it's kind of bonkers. So I FedExed my resume to the CEO of Disney and the IT director of Disney.
Wow.
I got a call a week later. I got the contract.
Wow.
But I literally went around all of the machinery. I went around all of the BS and I went right to the person. And that's kind of how I feel about these books. These books are sniper rifle bullets, right? You could literally reach out and touch, if I'm trying to get an interview on MSNBC for someone, guess what? I'm going to FedEx the book to the editor over there directly. And they're going to sign for it. So I know they opened it. Yeah. There are ways to use these things kind of in a much different way than broadly speaking,
Yeah. No, I love this idea. And I love that the potential that comes with it is amazing. It's a lot of work up front. It's a lot of thought and time, but at the same time, the things that could come from it could be great for anybody. So it's been great talking to you, Scott. Where can people find you, or if they have questions, where do they go to find you and talk about this with you?
So, look me up on Google, Scott Turman on Google, or find me on LinkedIn, or go to my company, Brightray Publishing, BRIGHTRAY publishing.com. Mm-hmm. And contact us, and we can definitely kind of help you. We can pull that book out of your head. Also, look for me on Amazon for our new book, How to Build a Brand with a Book, on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. And Ryan, I really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah. And I want to encourage everybody right now, to wrap this up, like we talked about in the beginning, sit down, think about your story. I'm not saying you're going to write a book tomorrow or next week or next year, but think about it. Start journaling, start writing things down, and you never know what you might come up with. And think about how it relates to your audience and who you're trying to sell to, or the opportunities you're trying to create, like Scott, who got into Disney by sending his book, his resume, not his book, but his resume to the CEO. And you could do the same thing with your book. If you're trying to get your foot in the door with the right place or the right person, get your book out there, get your resume out there, and be direct and be ambitious. So Scott, thank you again so much for being on this episode. I really appreciate it. And I wish you all the continued success, and let's get some people knocking on your door.
Ryan, it was really nice meeting you, and thank you very much.
Okay, take care. Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you're interested in becoming an episode sponsor, please email me at livingryan@gmail.com. And thank you so much.